Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon for those of you that are here live with us. It's really nice to be here with you. Can't wait till we can all be back in a room together versus on webinars. If you're watching this live, it's about 6 p.m. Eastern. It's only 3 here Pacific for me. So hopefully you're home, you're relaxed, you've got an adult beverage. If you have an adult beverage, this is going to be one of the best presentations, webinar or live, that you've ever seen. But if you don't have an adult beverage and you're like myself with coffee, then we'll get through it one way or the other. But no, I'm really excited to be here. I want to say a big special thanks to Drake Dental Lab. If you're here and you currently work with Drake, no introduction is necessary. You know what an amazing lab you work with. The partnership we have at Carbon with Drake is strong, and I really appreciate it. And we're really it's good to be here tonight because today, whatever time it happens to be, because this is what's happening in our industry. We can't talk about anything. Digital dentures, digital night guards, that's the topic tonight, right? And what does digital mean? Because it's a little different, clinician versus lab, and we're going to go through some of those differences. And really, by the end of this presentation, I think you'll have a really good grasp on the benefits that these new materials and processes provide for clinicians and patients. But I love this quote from Elon Musk. If you guys heard him say it, I think he might have said this, not sure, it might have been that webinar, or not the webinar, the podcast he did with Joe Rogan. He's done a couple, and sometimes Elon gets himself in hot water. He sure did on one of those Joe Rogan podcasts, but he also, I think this is where I heard him mention this, and it's true. We know in our personal lives how fast technology changes, how hard it is to keep up with, and then in our professional lives and industry, we have a major shift. Somebody forgot to mute there, but hey, it's live. At least it's live, right? We know that this is what's happening. We know that the fixed side of our industry shifted largely from analog to mostly digital over a decade ago, right? I mean, my CDT is Crown and Bridge. I'm a fixed dental lab technician. I used to wax and cast crowns like the image you see here on the screen. Worked at the bench for years, stacking porcelain, and then Emax came along. We started pressing crowns, and then we started milling. And it's taken a long time for the removable side of the industry to catch up, but it sure has, and it's actually transforming much more rapidly than the fixed side did. The materials have come along, and the technology, like we're going to look at tonight, now enables us to print. Use additive manufacturing to print dentures and splints and prostheses that are traditionally only fabricated by wax and lots of hands-on steps. And this is where we're at in dentistry today, though. We're at this interesting intersection. We have been for a while, and we will be for a while, honestly, because we're at the intersection of the art and the hand craftsmanship that is so critical to our industry, right? Because everything a dental lab does, every product a dental lab makes is bespoke. It only fits in one patient's mouth one way. It's a custom, everyone is a custom piece. And dental labs have to do that consistently. They have to do that at scale. They have to be able to do it, repeatedly. And that's where the technology and the material science comes in. We do have a pretty staggering shortage of experienced technicians in the industry today. And I know no matter what industry you're in, maybe some of us have friends in other industries, or we just realize from the way our lives are being lived today that staffing is a real issue. Nationwide in every industry, staffing is an issue, and it has been an issue in our industry, I should say, in our side of the industry, the dental lab side, for quite a while, and especially with experienced removable technicians. The average age of an experienced removable technician is around retirement, and COVID didn't help that. It exacerbated retirement in many instances. And we don't have as many dental lab schools as we used to, so we don't have a lot of these experienced technicians entering the workforce. So for dental labs to be able to say, not even just future cast and say, where is our business going? How can we scale? We'll just hire technicians, and it's not that easy anymore. So that's where the technology really comes in and allows these experienced technicians to move from the bench to the digital realm and share their knowledge with people who don't have as much experience, maybe people who have no dental lab experience, and still create some amazing products. So And then there's the business strategy piece, right? There's the communication from the labs, being your best resource. Great example is what we're doing here today, Drake putting on a CE webinar, right? Providing CE credits and also showing you some of the most cutting edge materials. So dental labs have to do all this, and that's right where we're at. And let's focus on a couple of these products, right? So, there's these stats, these are provided to us by our friends from Keystone. And we know that bruxism's been around for a while, right? But what's changed a lot in the last year is the type of patient and the number of patients that are experiencing dentition-related trauma because of bruxism. Some of you may have even participated in this survey in March, ADA survey. Over 70% of clinicians are now saying that they see an increase in bruxism and the associated damage to teeth. And there's no doubt that we live in a very stressful world today. And, the fact of the matter is that a night guard used to be for patients who had a history of bruxing and grinding. You could see that they were, grinding their teeth, usually at night. It was nice to protect implant cases, some anterior cases, maybe 6 through 11 layered, veneers or something. And you want to make sure that the patient's not going to chip them. But now younger patients are coming in with, dentition that is really being destroyed. And so there's never been a greater need for these products. And that's just night guards, right? And we know that dentures, that's one of the fastest growing segments of our industry, and it has been for years, and it will continue to be so. But how do you produce a night guard today? When you send a prescription off to a lab, here's the 4 main ways that night guards are produced today. There's the traditional acrylic method. It's been around for forever, really. Forever is beyond my 22 years in the industry. And it's still being used today. And we're going to kind of take a look at that in a minute, some of the associated issues with it. You can thermoform, which is basically a suck down. It's almost like a heavy bleach tray material. And you reduce some of the labor, but you don't produce an appliance that is quite as robust. And you don't eliminate some of the fit issues and some of the associated issues from the process of making it that I'm going to show you in just a minute. There's a couple ways to make digital night guards, right? You can mill them, and now you can print them. And these printable night guards have been on the market a little over a year now. And man, they have really transformed not only the way that these prostheses fit, but just the whole experience, which I'll share with you in just a second. Milling is nice. It reduces some of the labor, but it is a very slow process in the mill for a lab, because to be able to cut the acrylic with a burr and a mill, you have to slow the spindle way down. Otherwise, you'll melt the material. So these 2 night guards you see on the screen in front of you here, they took, probably an hour and a half to, 2.5 hours, probably hour each. It might have taken 2.5 hours to mill these 2 night guards. In the same amount of time, Drake on their carbon printer can print 10 of these key splint night guards. So much more efficient process. Here's some other benefits if we want to take a look at them. They are super strong and abrasion resistant. There are 2 key splint night guard materials. There's a key splint soft, it's referred to as, and there's a key splint hard. I want to show you, I don't have a sample of the key splint hard in front of me, but the key splint soft it's not actually a soft night guard. It refers to the pliability and the fact that it's a thermoactive material. So when you warm it up in some warm water, you put it in your mouth, it has a very pliable feel. It almost feels like the hard soft style, but it's monolithic, meaning there's no inner layer that's going to debond. As we know, those hard soft style, that inner layer will eventually come apart and separate. That doesn't happen with this. It's a very robust material. It's actually is a rigid material. I'm going to squeeze it here. So you can see that soft just refers to really the feel of it. And I'm going to show you a study here in a minute that shows the strength in relation to the hard. So if you have a patient that tears through everything, and you could put a stainless steel night guard in their mouth and they're going to chew through that eventually, there are options that Drake can help you figure out which material you should go with. But patients and dentists both report an improved fit. We have many clinicians who are night guard users, and they'll say, hey, I can't tolerate a night guard. And, this is the first one that I'll actually wear, and I'm supposed to. A lot of night guards, the patients are supposed to wear them, but they end up on the floor, the bedroom floor, when they wake up in the morning, because they just can't tolerate them. So the digital record is a hugely impactful benefit for both printed night guards and dentures. And we'll talk about dentures here in a minute. But if you think about the fact that once they create this night guard, then they store that file for you for free. And if the dog eats the night guard, believe me, I've heard a lot of stories. I think mostly how night guards disappear is dogs eat them. I've heard about them going down garbage disposals, all kinds of crazy stuff. You guys have probably heard even crazier stories than I, but it's kind of fun to joke about that, but it's not fun when you deliver this prosthesis. Patient goes home, calls you, down the road and says, I lost my night guard. And then you start back over from scratch, right? And that's not the case here, because Drake will store this file for you at no charge. And if some dog eats the night guard, you simply just call them up, say, hey, I need a new night guard. They'll pull the file up, they'll reprint it, they'll polish it up, and they'll send it to you. So you don't have to see the patient again for an impression, which is a huge benefit. We'll touch on the benefits of that with dentures in a minute. You're probably already thinking of some right now. Your wheels are turning, but we'll touch on them. And I mentioned to you guys how we have a shortage of removable technicians. Here's our wear study. This is a Leinfelder test where they test abrasion resistance. This is again provided by our friends at Keystone who make this resin. And if you look at the left side of the chart there, you notice some of these other materials that you might be familiar with, and then you look at the abrasion loss. But realize that if you notice on the right side, they tested these key splint products at double the test cycles of most of these on the page. So you can see at double the test cycles, they have very similar material loss and abrasion resistance to the other materials. And actually key splint hard on this chart actually shows that it is the strongest and most robust now on their study. So you're not sacrificing anything with strength. And there's a lot of benefits. So we just want to make sure that we call that out, because I know that's really important. And that would be a concern for me, is like, oh, this is already sounding really good, but let's see, what the studies show as far as, how is it going to hold up in our patients' mouths. So let's take a look at traditional night guard fabrication. The vast majority of night guards that are done today are still done the traditional acrylic process method. And if you haven't been to the lab for a while, and most of us haven't been anywhere for a while, we're just starting to crawl out of our caves, but this is how a night guard is fabricated. You start by building up wax, and you put it on. Actually, you start by pouring a model. You'll duplicate the model. You'll wax the night guard up, and then you'll invest that wax up in a flask, much like dentures. Once that stone hardens, you put it in a boil out unit. You melt that wax out of the mold, you inject or press acrylic into that flask and break it apart once it cools off, and voila, there is your night guard. And now we need to destroy the first model that we waxed it on, because we have to chisel the night guard off the model. And this is where a certain percentage of night guards actually meet their demise right here, death by chisel. It does happen. But anyway, so then you go back to your duplicated model and you start grinding and grinding, because no matter how good of a waxer you are, you can't get an accurate and consistent thickness all the way across. So the finishers are going to finish the night guard off, make it smooth, make it a consistent thickness, and then readjust the occlusion that they had dialed in wax, because we have things like expansion that happens with the stone and expansion with the acrylic when you're processing it. And if you look at all those steps that I just showed you there, and obviously that was sped up, that represents about 4 hours of total time. And it represents about 2 or 2.5 hours of hands-on technician time. So very, very labor intensive. And it takes a long time to teach somebody how to create a night guard like that. And so circling back to, knowing now that there is a pretty staggering shortage of removable technicians, you can see how this could start to be a real problem for labs. And you can also, something else jumps out, it's pretty glaring there, that what engineers like to call copy error, where anytime you get further and further away from the original iteration, it just introduces little room for error here and there. And what that means in a process like this, when we're creating a prosthesis that has to fit in a patient's mouth, is it's going to affect the fit. When you have an impression and you pour that impression, we have an old saying in the lab industry that, the first pour is the best pour, right? So you pour that's going to be the most accurate, because once you separate that model from that impression, you're going to just somewhat distort the impression material there just by means of that process. Sometimes parts of the impression tear out, and then you're going to duplicate that. So now you have a copy of a copy, so to speak. And now you wax, and you have, there's expansion issues with the stone. Maybe it's a little more humid one day. So there's just lots and lots of room for error. And when you can take an impression, scan the impression directly in, and I'm going to show you the workflow in a little bit here, then you cut out so much of that copy error. You don't have a technician's hands in wax. It's just so more accurate. So I'm going to show you now this is a little video that Carbon created to show you the key splint workflow for the night guards. So think about what you just saw for traditional, and then let's contrast it to what the key splint workflow looks like here. So when you watch that, to me, what always comes to mind is it's like, if you were to jump in like a 1957 Ford farm truck and drive that around and then get in a Tesla, right? I mean, that's really in essence what we're talking about. It's that different, the technology that enables us to create these. Pretty fun to see. Let's talk about dentures for a second. So dentures, very similar, right? You create dentures with wax and acrylic. So you first create them in wax. There's the processes where you try those in, and then you eventually convert that to acrylic by boiling the wax out of a mold. So we don't need to watch a video kind of outlining all that. We understand how that's made, but let's touch on some of the other ways that dentures can be made today, because there's a lot of white noise in the industry about digital. So really, it's important to say, what is digital, right? And digital is a couple different things, and it's different for clinicians than it is for the lab. Even though we think about digital workflow as this all-encompass, strategy, I guess you could say. But for clinicians, it's all about how we acquire the data, and then for dental labs, it's a lot of times it's still converting analog to digital, and then the production process being digital. All the way through once we do that conversion. And we'll walk through that here in a minute, but you can create digital dentures by milling or printing today. And milled digital dentures have been around for a little while now. And I'll tell you, I was really excited about milled dentures as a technician back running my lab back in the day, because I was looking for ways to move from the bench to the digital workflow in the removable side of our lab like we had done with a fixed, and bring all the efficiencies to our lab and to our clinicians that we did. And what we found out really quickly about milling is yes, it does reduce some of that labor, and it does move the design process to digital, but it's very, very time consuming. Like I was showing you about the night guards there. Again, we're cutting acrylic with a burr. We have to slow the spindle of the mill way down or we'll melt it. So what that means is it takes hours and hours to produce a denture in a mill. It's also pretty wasteful. Additive technology will always, when it comes to efficiency, additive technology will always win over reductive technology like milling, because with milling, you're starting with a large mass of material. You're cutting out just the pieces you need and the rest gets thrown away. Maybe some of it gets recycled, but it's a slow process, even though it is digital. There's also what I call generation 1 printed materials. So milling, that's been around for a while now. And then about 2 to 2.5 years ago, we were able to hold in our hands the first dentures produced on a 3D printer. And while that was amazing proof of concept, and it was really, really just mind blowing to go, oh my gosh, we're here, we've arrived, right? But we hadn't quite yet, because those generation 1 materials are not high impact. They're brittle and they're not very aesthetic. And it's really important to note, and I'm going to say this, like, really emphasize this. Right now, today, when you're watching this webinar, Lucitone digital print is the only high impact denture resin available, FDA cleared denture resin available on the market. And it's been on the market for a couple of years. So it has a proven track record, thousands of these dentures in the mouth. And I'll walk you through the workflow here in a minute, but it's really important. Something that I do is I love to cut through the white noise, and there's a lot of marketing, a lot of white noise out there. Any other digital printed denture today is low impact. And it's not to say they don't have their uses and their indications, temporaries and immediates, things like that. But they're just, they're brittle. And if you hold them, 6 feet up and you drop them on a floor, a lot of times they're going to shatter. That's the point. I'm going to walk you through the strength here of this Lucitone digital print and talking about the process. Let's look at some high level benefits quickly, just kind of like we did with the Splints. With the Splints and the dentures, clinicians don't have to have intraoral scanners. And that's sometimes I'll be talking to clinicians. My older brother, love him dearly. He's a prosthodontist. And I had a conversation with him about this. I had many conversations with him about digital dental technology. And he's like, Jamie, I would love to do a digital denture. I don't have an intraoral scanner yet. So when I have an intraoral scanner in the future, I'll do digital dentures. And I'm like, no. That's the thing. The digital production process is for the lab, and we'll convert your analog records to digital, and we'll make it work in the lab with our technology that we've invested in. Clinicians don't have to change anything. So if you're taking traditional PVS impressions, you can still get these dentures from Drake, no problem. Double the work of fractures rating over Lucitone 199. So Lucitone 199, that's a strong denture material, right? At room temperature, it's 1,500 joules per meter squared. So what Dentsply found out when they converted this basically Lucitone 199, when they converted that to this resin for printing, an interesting side effect happened that when it warms up to body temperature, it doubles to 3,000 joules per meter squared in the patient's mouth. So incredibly strong. If you YouTube or do Google searches for Lucitone digital print, just Google that with like Ford Raptor, and you'll see all kinds of videos on the internet of people running these over with trucks. They'll do tests where they run a traditional denture over along with an LDP denture. The traditional denture will shatter, and the LDP denture won't have a scratch on it. And they're throwing them out of 5-story windows and up against brick walls. They're incredibly strong. Again, patients and dentists report improved fit. How could they not? We're removing so much of that copy error, right? And so that's where we get the improved fit. Here we go again. Talk about efficiency, especially now in this post-ish COVID world that we're living in. We understand that it takes longer to turn over operatories. Less patient visits is a priority for patients and for dentists. We're not going to probably go back to pre-COVID appointments and dental care. Everybody now is kind of adjusted to less appointments, less time for this, takeout food. Things are going to be different for quite a while. And the fact of the matter is that, a traditional denture, it's 5, 6, maybe 7 or more appointments by the time you do all the adjustments and stuff. These LDP dentures can be delivered in 3 to 4 clinical appointments. So you can reduce chair time, patient visits, and have a better fitting prosthesis. Also, the digital record, we touched on that with Splints. It is really impactful with dentures, especially if you talk about patients in long-term care facilities, convalescent homes, things like that. If you have those elderly patients, a lot of them require special transportation to get back and forth from their residence to the clinic or to your office. Sometimes they require special medication for each appointment, depending on what is happening with their health situation. You got to keep them stable for their appointments and worry about, the different interactions and things like that. Some of them have to be sedated. So that being said, it is pretty arduous to get one denture created for some of these patients. We also know that they're some of the most common that are going to lose or damage their dentures, and we know how rapidly their health deteriorates when they do. So think about that digital record and the fact that once Drake produces these for you, they store these files. Think about that peace of mind where a patient loses a denture. And again, it's not funny to talk about dogs eating dentures when you've done 6 or 7 appointments to get a denture delivered, and then you got to go through all those appointments again, because once it's done, that's it, right? So you call Drake, you say, hey, patient lost the denture, dog ate the denture, whatever happened. Drake will pull that file up, they'll reprint it, they'll assemble it, polish it, and send it to you. You can have a denture back in your office without even seeing the patient again, and that is complete game changer, right? Here's that strength. This is provided to us by our friends at Dentsply, so you can actually see how Lucitone digital print compares to their high impact material and also traditional Lucitone 199. And there is that 3,000, slightly over 3,000 joules per meter squared. They call this the BAM effect, or the body activated material. Again, I don't think that was an intended, they didn't necessarily know that was going to happen. And it's pretty amazing to be able to have this kind of a strength by converting this resin, this material to a printable resin. This is a pretty cool video here. You try to do this with a traditional acrylic denture, right? It's not going to happen. So we're talking about a really, really game-changing material here. I want to touch base with you now for a minute on 3D printing. I want to talk about the technology that enables a lab to produce these. So both these products we're talking about tonight. We're talking about Splint printed digital night guards and Lucitone digital print dentures. They're both exclusively produced. The Splint soft clear and the Lucitone digital print are exclusively produced on carbon printers. And I'm going to show you a little bit about why that is, why companies will partner with carbon. And I want to let you know that you probably are getting, marketing material sent your way all the time for chairside printers, right? And Drake could probably choose from 25 to 30 different printers on the market. And they've chosen to partner with carbon because our technology is very different. So let's just have a dental geek out session here for just a second so that we can understand 3D printing, because 3D printing has become a household name, household term. We know that our children can buy 3D printers at, craft stores, hobby shops, and they can have them in their rooms, and they can have an app on their phone, and they can, download files, and they can print action figures and little widgets in their 3D printers. But not every 3D printer is made the same, although they are similar. So let's kind of calibrate on 3D printing, and I'm going to show you how ours is different and why that's changing the world. And then we're going to go through the workflow of LDP and Splint, and then we'll have some Q&A. So here we go. Every 3D printer will have the same, most 3D printers, this LDP style, will have the same type of technology where you have a piece of glass, and that piece of glass forms a basin. And the basin is where you put the resin. And then underneath the piece of glass, there's a light source. And then there's a build platform that will lower into the resin. And if you think about a part being printed, what happens is you design the part, and that's the CAD style, right? That's the CAD part of the process. And then the CAM is where the software slices that part up. So the whole part is sliced up into a bunch of individual slices that are like frames of a movie. If you watch a movie, it plays in its entirety. If you were to pull the film off the reel, you'll see a bunch of frames, right? That's kind of how I like to think about 3D printing, is those individual slices are played on the underside of the glass, and the resin on top of the glass, that UV light will partially cure the resin to the glass. And that's one layer of the part. And then the build platform will pull that partially cured layer off the glass, and then new resin will flow underneath. The next part of slice of the part is played, the UV light cure the next layer, partially cure it, it'll pull off. So that's, you do that over and over again, and you're 3D printing. And traditionally 3D printing has been very slow. It's also yielded parts that are rough and that are kind of like, I think of them like a wafer cookie. They're not as strong, and they have just different mechanical properties because of the way that they're built. But the co-founders of Carbon realized that while the UV light will cure the resin or partially cure it, oxygen inhibits that curing of the resin. So they developed a very special piece of glass. We call it our window, and it's oxygen permeable. It's actually two very special pieces of glass that we pump oxygen between. What happens then is that oxygen can pass through the glass, and it forms what we call a dead zone. And I know the dead zone sounds kind of ominous, like what great could happen in the dead zone, but that's where all the magic is actually, because the dead zone is an area where the resin cannot partially cure to the glass. So although it is partially cured, it will not stick to the glass, meaning that build platform can raise continuously out of the vat as new resin flows underneath, without partially curing each layer and then pulling it off the glass. A couple big benefits there. You can print much faster. You can print parts that are smoother and that have different mechanical isotropic properties. And I'll show you that in just a second. Another huge benefit is that when you partially cure a layer of resin and pull it off the glass, and you do that over and over and over again, you're taking microscopic layers off that glass. And over time, that changes the properties of that glass, almost like a lens that's being affected over time. So it'll affect the accuracy of the parts being produced and need to be replaced. And that also does not happen with our technology. So here is a real close-up shot of a couple parts, and you can see how different our parts look printed on the Carbon printers. We don't have that horizontal layer by layer build, wafer cookie, like I like to call it. And you can see how the mechanical properties, how the strength, no matter how you orient the part, the strength is very similar. So very, very different technology. It enables us to print some pretty complex structures like this lattice that you see here. These lattice structures here are making up the inside of a hockey helmet. And there's many, many industries, many partners here I'm going to share with you that are using our technology now to print all kinds of different products. But in the consumer market, that lattice is really being adopted for things like the shoes that you see. If you haven't seen these Adidas 4D forward shoes, watching the Olympics this summer, you're going to probably see quite a bit about them. They spend a lot of time constructing these struts and figuring out how to design these struts. And these are the first shoes ever to be created that studies will show that as a runner runs, these struts will compress, and then they will actually help to propel the runner forward because they compress and then release and actually give a little bit of a kick. But if you look at the helmets, like the hockey helmet I just showed you, you can scan a runner's foot, and you can scan a player's head, and you can develop these products that fit intimately only one way on a person, where before, like you look at a football helmet or a hockey helmet, it was closed cell foam. So it's measure your head, are you small, medium, large, here's your helmet, and it's foam. And that's kind of been the standard of care, I guess you could say. But now you can put a reflective hood on a player's head and scan it, take that into design software, and then you can create these lattice pieces that fit only one way, just fit each player custom. And that lattice is very lightweight, but it's very impact absorbent. So superior safety. Rydell, the football helmet company, for the NFL that makes these helmets. The NFL always surveys safety of helmets. And I think last survey I saw that the top 3 safest helmets in the NFL now use this technology and our printers to make these. So Specialized uses our printers to make custom bike seats, same thing, lattice bike seats. There's a scanning process for feet. There's a scanning process for players' heads. I'm told there's a scanning process for bike seats. I myself haven't undergone that scanning process. I am a cyclist. But they also just make these off the shelf. You don't have to get scanned. We're talking about if anybody's a cyclist that's watching this, you understand that kind of the limiting factor of enjoyment being on a bike is really that seat. And so this is much cooler, and it eliminates pressure points, and we got a lot of pro riders now riding with this seat. And then in the automotive industry, companies like Ford and Lamborghini are using our printers to produce parts on production vehicles. And there's an interesting study that like over 90% of the warranty issues, if you take your car into the dealership, a new car into the dealership for a warranty issue, over 90% of them are electrical issues caused by electrical connectors. Most of those are connectors, well, actually all of them come from injection molding. And that's where the real disruption is coming worldwide in manufacturing. 3D printing is disrupting the kind of the old school process of injection molding, because injection molding, you have a mold that is a few $100,000. And if you think about it, if you want to change a part, you have to change and retool that mold. So you either need a new mold or you need to completely revamp a mold. Where the world really figured out here, like with COVID, when you want to iterate very quickly, you just go into the design software, change your design, and an hour later you can have a part off a printer to iterate with. So rapidly changing lots. I mean, eyeglasses, earbuds, you name it. Start looking at 3D printing and manufacturing, and you'll be pretty amazed at the change worldwide. One of the most exciting those in the medical space, if you haven't heard about bioabsorbable materials, you can 3D print, components like a heart stent, and you can put it in a patient's artery, and it will stay solid for. You can program these materials. It will stay solid for whatever amount of time they need to. Patient's artery, it heals around this heart stent. That material will then break down and absorb, just pass through the body without a trace. Really interesting if you start talking about like microneedles. Microneedles were really interesting a couple of years ago, but boy, now that vaccines are such a hot topic, this is really what, there's big companies like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Moderna are looking at microneedle as the next whole wave of being able to use for any type of medication that you need to deliver multiple doses, right? And we can all think of what some of those medications are, but vaccines are the top of everybody's mind today. You can inject a little micro needle under the dermis, and it'll deliver its medication, and then it can just dissolve and pass through the body without a trace, without having to be removed, and without needing multiple injections. So again, a little bit of geeking out, but it's pretty fun to think about how our world is changing. And even NASA is using carbon printers. So the same printers that Drake has, that same technology that they're creating these amazing dentures and night guards with, NASA's using. They have parts on this little free flyer robotic inspector. So pretty cool to think about that. And you start to look at it in those terms, and you go, okay, I've got a lab here who's made a decision to invest in this technology that is so far heads and tails above anything else that, what else can they do? Well, lots of other things with their printer, like, very accurate models, even soft tissue moulage, castable components, surgical guides, precision surgical guides can be printed. So anything that you see here, Drake is producing on their carbon printers. So pretty amazing. And hopefully that wasn't, nobody fell asleep there, but I think it's pretty interesting to figure out how this technology works and how it's different. And now when you hear about 3D printed parts, or maybe you're already shopping on the Adidas website for a pair of those shoes right now. They're pretty cool. So let's talk about the workflow here, and then we're going to get into the Q&A. But as I said, these are exclusively produced on these carbon printers. Let's take a look. We saw that video that kind of walked you through with some really cool music, the key splint workflow. But let's just kind of show you that, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the Lucitone digital print denture workflow, and then I want to leave enough time because I'm sure you guys will probably have some questions, which I'd love to answer. But we did touch on already the fact that, you know, digital night guard does not mean you have to have a digital impression scanner. You can certainly use an intraoral scanner. You would scan the arch, upper and lower arch, just like you normally would. You would scan the bite, have the patient close and scan the bite like you normally would. You would send that to the lab. Lab will take that, import that into their design software. Simple as that. And they'll design the night guard. If you do take a traditional impression, the lab can either scan the impression or scan a model, like you see the picture here on the screen of that. They'll pour that into their design software. And if you haven't seen some of the lab design software today, it's pretty amazing. And when things open back up, pop into a lab, call Drake up. Maybe they can give you do a screen share demo and show you what they're doing, because these technicians have all the same tools that you have at the bench. In the analog world, you have those same tools in your software. So, you know, if you want to do a flat plane occlusion on the night guard, if you want to do a ramped occlusion, you can set the virtual articulator up to do either one of those. It's again, like we talked about, no sacrifice for strength. There's any type of design that you want to do, these technicians can do in the software. They're then going to put it in that's the CAD, the design part. They're going to put it in the CAM software. This is a screenshot of our carbon printer. Actually, you can see these are 10 key splint night guards on our carbon printer, and you can see that the print time is estimated at about 1 hour and 40 minutes. So that's about the amount of hands-on time it takes to create one night guard the traditional way. Now, this is not all the time it takes to produce these 10 night guards, right? Let's be honest, they had to be scanned and imported and designed, and there's still, you know, a lot of work that goes into these. But the actual print time, if you look at the efficiency, you can really see why when we start to talk about the world of additive manufacturing, how it's transforming the traditional methods. It's just super efficient. So they're going to print the night guards, and then there's going to be a process where they clean them up, remove the residual resin with isopropyl alcohol, and then they let them dry. They put them in a cure unit, cures under nitrogen. Takes about 30 minutes in the cure unit, and then they're ready to polish them up and send them off. So that's the basic in a nutshell workflow for key splint. We're going to jump to Lucitone digital print and kind of talk about that workflow. Same thing. You can take a traditional impression. There are clinicians that are starting to scan. It's a little bit trickier to scan an edentulous arch or two edentulous arches. It's those. Some of those key points, those landmarks that you need to get are sometimes pretty hard to capture. There are some technicians that are having, or some clinicians that are having some success doing this. I'm going to talk to you about a great way that you can use your scanner in this workflow, but you can also definitely continue to take traditional impressions. And probably the vast majority of dentists that are doing these Lucitone digital print dentures are taking traditional impressions and bite records. And then those will be scanned in the lab. The models, the bite records will be scanned in the lab, like you see here. So they'll just scan your records in. They'll put them into the software, and then they're going to start to assemble these pieces digitally in the software and design these dentures. Once these dentures are designed, this is a really unique part of this process, is that there's a monolithic functional try-in that the lab will print. And it's really interesting because you think about a traditional wax try-in, and it really has its limitations. It's nice in a way because you can move the teeth around if you need to, but it's not functional, meaning the patient really can't wear it. They can't grind around on it. With these functional try-ins, the patient, if you wanted to, the patient could actually wear it home and try it, go home, try it in, talk with it, eat with it. They could really give it a good test drive if they wanted to. It also becomes a means of communication. So it's pretty simple if you want to communicate changes. So you go, oh, that's great. If it fits, try-in fits, we confirm the try-in fits. And then you just tell the lab, yeah, make the final denture to be just like the try-in. But what if you do need to communicate some changes to the lab? Pretty easy to do. You can just take a Sharpie, and like you see here, hey, can you move the midline over this much? Add, a millimeter. You can add wax or acrylic if you wanted to make, changes. If you wanted to say, hey, bulk this out, bulk the cuspids out a little bit or rotate this, you just mock it up like it's like a prototype. And, I've heard it referred to as it's like a bite block with teeth, right? So it's a different way to think about the try-in process, and it's a much more accurate way to think about the try-in process. So you just communicate the changes, if there are any, to the lab. They will take and scan those changes in. They'll overlay them with the denture design they have. They'll make the changes, and then they will print and assemble the final denture. I'm going to show you that assembly process right now. So they'll send those files to the printer. They're going to print the bases. This workflow is unique in that there's many tooth options. So actually it's a printed base and it still uses a carded tooth. So you have the aesthetics and the strength of a carded tooth. If somebody wouldn't mind muting for me, that would be awesome. Good to know you're here though. It keeps me on my toes for sure. But it uses a carded tooth. You can the lab can also mill PMMA if they want to for milled teeth, and you can actually also print teeth as well. So depending on the VDO and the patient's occlusion and function, Drake will decide which tooth option is best and they will go with it. But let me show you what it looks like to assemble these dentures with the carded Dentsply tooth. So you have the printed base here, and you can see that the socket, you don't grind on these teeth like traditional denture teeth. There's no grinding. The geometry is all fixed in the software. So the socket is printed to intimately fit each tooth. So there's no adjusting. You just take the tooth, you fill the socket with some of the fused material. The fused material is the same parent material as the base. So you don't want to think about this as like we're gluing teeth into the base and there's the weak link. The teeth are going to break out of the base. Labs will fuse these in, and they'll take pliers and try to break the teeth out of the base, and they'll break the teeth before they'll break the bond of the tooth to the base. So it's a true fusing process wherein you're using the same parent material and then you're doing an overall cure. So the technicians will put the teeth in, 2 or 3 at a time, tack cure them, and then they'll continue around the arch until all the teeth are in the arch. Once that's done, they will put them in a cure unit, and it's a cure cycle where you cure both sides of the denture. So you go teeth up first. It's about a 10-minute cure cycle, and the UV lights. The UV lights are specially tuned for heat and the frequency of the UV light to cure this denture material. Then it reaches its full strength, and those teeth are fully fused to the base. And at that point, you just polish them up. And there's what one looks like, polished up and ready to go out the door. So you can really see these are beautiful, and you can see that the technicians in the design software, they can design that, they can customize that gingival anatomy. These things can be stippled. And with those carded teeth, you have the same type of aesthetics that you get with traditional dentures. So they're super aesthetic and very, very strong. I want to touch on the digital aspect. If if you're a very skilled, clinician, and you can capture those landmarks and communicate to your lab the edentulous arch via your scanner, that's great. But you think about it, there's no powdering. Most scanners don't use powder anymore. But if you were going to try to, use powder or something to capture that arch, that's not going to happen in the mouth, right? So there are some tricks and techniques coming out where some clinicians are using some little dots of acrylic, and they're placing them here and there on the arch, and then they're communicating that. But here's a really, really slick way. If you do have an intraoral scanner, it's becoming commonly known as the copy denture or the reference denture. And it's for a patient that has an existing denture. And we know the vast majority of new denture cases you're going to do are for existing denture users, right? Wearers. So if they have an existing denture, maybe the fit's just not quite the adaptation to the tissue. Maybe their tissue has recessed and they don't have a good fitting denture, but they're pretty happy with the aesthetics. Maybe they just like some whiter teeth or something like that. You can do a wash impression of the denture in the patient's mouth, and you pull that out, and then you scan that denture. You send the file to the lab, and they will import that into their software, and they will design the denture based on that what you've created. Now, you can also do this without an intraoral scanner, this copy reference denture. You do the wash impression, you send that impression, that denture with the impression to the lab. The lab will then scan it in their lab scanner, and they'll import it into their software. The nice thing about the intraoral scanner workflow is the patient doesn't have to be without their denture, because they're in the chair, you do the wash impression, pull it out, scan it, send that file to the lab, you pull the wash impression out, give the denture back to the patient, and they go home and they wear their existing denture while the lab is making their denture. So what Drake will do is they'll take this scan, they'll import it into their software, they'll find teeth in the carded tooth library that match the changes the patient wants. Maybe they want teeth that are a little more square, or maybe they want them that are a little bit more rounded, whatever shade they want. And then what you're going to do is you're going to print that base, they're going to assemble it like I just showed you, and then you're going to have a denture that fits great and also looks good. And that requires many less appointments. You're talking about, you can skip the try-in then, right? There's really no reason to do try-in, because you basically are already sending them, the try-in. It's like you're sending them, when you start with the patient's existing denture, it's like you're starting with the wax try-in basically. And you're telling them what changes to make right there. So you could do these in like 2 to 3 appointments. Most labs are calling it like, or most dentists are referring this to as like the 3-appointment denture. So great way to use an intraoral scanner if you really want to take advantage of the workflow. We're going to be heading into the Q&A here in just a second, but to kind of recap what we talked about, high level, less chair time, we're talking reduced appointments. And if you want to know the exact workflow, that'd be a good question to ask, Elizabeth and Andre from Drake as we head into the Q&A, like how many appointments are required, and kind of talk to them about some of the workflow would be great. So yeah, faster turnaround times. The digital file is just a complete game changer. I'm sure you've already conceptualized many ways that would benefit you and your patients. And then better fitting, less adjustments, happier patients. I have dentists, express to me all the time that they would just rather not do dentures, right? Like I don't enjoy doing dentures. I can't, I feel like I'm attached to these cases forever. They're coming back for adjustments constantly, and it's hard to get patients happy and on their way and satisfied with this traditional process. And now finally we have, if it was only a better fitting, stronger denture, game over. And that'd be amazing, right? But then you have all these other benefits like reduced chair appointments and digital record. And it's just, I highly encourage you, especially if you're one of those dentists that has expressed to your peers or to others, or maybe just in the mirror every morning, how much you despise doing dentures. call Drake up and send him a case, and let's give it a shot and see how it changes for you. We're going to wrap it up and move to Q&A here. I want to bring it back to the beginning slide. We're talking about evolving. We're talking about changing. We're talking about the evolution of our industry. And I love this quote from Henry Ford. We know this is true. If we continue to do what we always have done, we're just going to continue to get the same result, right? And what I really like about this Henry Ford quote is he said this all those many years ago about his business. This was his philosophy. And today, Ford Motor Companies was the first automotive manufacturer in history to put 3D printed parts on production vehicles, and they did it with a carbon printer. So it's pretty cool to think about his philosophy, and then all those years later, what his company is doing. I just think Henry Ford would be a big fan of how the world is transitioning to additive manufacturing. So, on that evolution note too, if you haven't seen the evolution of a dental lab technician, you're going to want to see this. This is the first day in the lab. This is about 15 years in. And here's what we have to look forward to about 30 years in. So there are times where I'm speaking to dentists live, and it's kind of fun to change this to evolution of a dentist. But since I'm not here live with you, you can't throw anything at me. I didn't think it would be fair to pick on you. I just thought I would pick on us, on Drake, on anybody who's been a dental lab technician, either 15 or 30 years. So I'm going to hit the wall really quick here. I'm about 22 years in, and I know I've only got a couple years left here to hold it together. So anyway, thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate your time, and I loved being here with you tonight. If you have any today, whatever time it is, if you have any questions, now is the time to put them into that Q&A box. I'm going to ask Andre from Drake and Elizabeth to pop on here and join me. And let's see if we can get some questions going. And then we'll give you guys your, in a few minutes here, even if we're still going with Q&A, when we hit the hour mark, I'll go ahead and pop that CE course code on. So if some of you have only budgeted an hour for tonight, you can get that course code if you don't have time to hang around. So, hey guys.
Hey there.
How's it going?
Good. Andre, you there?
I am.
All right. So we do have a couple of questions. One of the first ones, I think this is for you, Jamie, is what is the cost of the carbon 3D printer?
So this is since this is a CE event, I'm not able to talk about pricing at all. We're just here to talk about materials and lab processes. So please feel free to contact me before we wrap up. I'll just do this really quickly. If you want to screenshot this or something, you're welcome to get a hold of me, and I can point you in the right direction. I actually don't sell carbon printers, so I don't know, but we can get that figured out for you.
All right. Next one, Andre, this one's for you. Does a digital denture improve the fit for a person with a flat palate?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's what we see the most of. We've been doing digital dentures for quite a while. The printed denture has a really cool advantage to it with a low or a very low ridge. It'll actually stick to the tissue, where people have to use both hands to pry it out of their mouth. So it does, like Jamie had said before, you don't have that incorporated distortion from going from impression to model to wax to acrylic. You're going straight from a digital file to a printed product. So you eliminate a lot of those distortions that are just inherent in analog worlds.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I'll add on, echo what Andre just said, but also what we're seeing is, a post dam is pretty necessary for a traditional denture. What we're starting to see now, and Andre, you're probably even experienced this too. We're starting to see some labs not even design the post dam and still have amazing suction and amazing fit. So,
oh, definitely, yeah. Just in regards to the post dam, traditionally, dentists are, creatures of habit, and I want a post dam, and some of the doctors have called and said, I had to take the post dam off.
Yeah.
Okay, Andre, this one's for you too. For the copy or reference denture, if the existing denture has teeth that are worn or adjusted to a natural opposing dentition, the new copy denture, does it have to have the same occlusion? And is that printed or done by the technician in the laboratory?
That for the copy denture, we can copy it exactly. So we would mill those teeth and then lute them to the base. So you would get an exact copy. If you want to change the dimension of the teeth, you have to provide a new VDO and an opposing for us to gauge that against, because we're going to be putting new teeth in there. So obviously something needs to change. If they've worn to a VDO that they're comfortable with, you really don't want to mess with that. So we can duplicate that exactly. And that's the beauty of all this.
Absolutely. And again, I'll just add my 2 cents. That the copy denture and the reference denture, it's kind of sometimes they're referred to as the same thing. The copy denture is more to what Andre was just saying. If you want an exact copy and the patient's pretty happy, maybe some minor changes. If you think about it as a reference denture, you could take an impression, put some bite material in there and get the opposing and send a scan that way as well. And so you can do it both ways. If it's a reference, then it would be a reference denture would be more what the attendee's question is, where it's like we've got something. It's almost like a bite rim or something. We've got the tissue kind of pretty close, but our occlusion is off. If that helps.